particular is something that I think there's been a lot of interest around at NOAA. As you'll see, we already have work ongoing with AI, but I think really having that focused leadership to say, hey, this is a priority, we're gonna make this happen, has been super important. So credit to him for that. So what I wanna talk to you about today is give you a quick overview of our NOAA AI strategy, and then corresponding implementation plan, and where we're going with AI at NOAA. And I think it's super exciting. I think there's already a lot of things happening. I think we have a really good, I think we have a good plan in place in terms of how we're gonna get to making AI more impactful and more central to what we do at NOAA and to our mission. And hopefully this is, hopefully you find this compelling as well. But I wanted to start with a couple stories of existing AI work, things we're already doing or things that are already happening related to AI. And because I think some examples are useful. And so first, CoralNet. So this is a joint effort between fisheries and NOS and the Coral Reef Conservation Program. And CoralNet is an automated human-in-the-loop point annotation system for coral reef imagery. And so you can see an example here on the left of how CoralNet works. Basically, you have, it's a trained model using neural networks to do point classification of different coral taxa. It's trained using first human-identified coral, and then you can run it and have automated detection. You can see an example of some of the detection there on the left, and on the right, you can see an example of some of the skill assessment, looking at coral cover from a human on the x-axis versus the system on the y-axis. And so this process works really well. It's an operational system. It's already been in place for a number of years, and it is really important when you think about the amount of imagery that analysts have to look at when they go do a coral survey. Before this existed, it would take potentially months to go through this imagery, and now they can do it in a few weeks. It saves over 25% of the time that was required before this was, in terms of an individual person doing this, before it was created. And it's still advancing. So, you know, the baseline product is there, it's been in use, but they're making improvements, including using things like structure from motion, so they can look at actual 3D coral topographies and use AI on those products. So I think it's just a really great example of an AI product already in development and a partnership across multiple line offices. Another example of AI at NOAA is this great monitoring work from OAR and the Cooperative Institute at Princeton, monitoring ocean state for improved climate predictions. So I think this is a unique example because it shows AI being used for learning more about a data set. And so in this case, what they're doing is they're identifying key ocean dynamic regimes using unsupervised learning, which means there's no training set in the initial analysis. They're just taking model data, global ocean model data, applying an unsupervised machine learning approach to that, and then identifying different dynamical regimes like you can see in the example here. And why is this important? Well, knowing large-scale ocean dynamics is obviously incredibly important to climate, right? Things like heat transport, ocean heat transport, really important to get that right if you're gonna make accurate climate prediction. And then combine this unsupervised approach with a more traditional machine learning neural network model to take the regimes that were identified, compare them to either surface elevations from satellite altimetry or other model data to make classifications based on what type of regime is in a particular location. So this is new research published in 2019, and I think just demonstrates the ability to use AI, not just to make a prediction about what's gonna happen into the future or for imagery analysis, but just to learn more about an underlying data set. Another example relating to numerical modeling is using global neural networks to generate a better wind wave model ensemble. And so this is work by the Weather Service, newly published this year. And so this is using an ML approach to improve ensemble mean computations. And so what this plot shows here is, you can see on the left is the 10-meter wind, on the right is significant wave height. The top is the standard ensemble mean. So you just take a mean of all your model ensembles. On the bottom is the neural network approach to generate a nonlinear ensemble mean. So applying that machine learning technique to better select what your ensemble mean should be. The red areas mean that compared to observations, the model forecasts are over projecting, and blue under forecasting. And so what you can see just quickly from the plot is that, you know, the areas where you take the just normal standard ensemble mean are doing much worse than the locations where you're using the neural network approach. And so I think this is a good example. And there's been other efforts as well doing similar types of things with model ensembles. And so I think it just is a great example of how you can take existing model frameworks, but apply AI to that to get a better answer, to get a better forecast. And I think shows some of the potential for applying AI to our existing model suite. And then the last example I want to mention is one that I've been involved with, and this is using AI to do rip current detection in coastal imagery. And so this is using machine learning neural network to take coastal images like the one you see there on the left and use object detection to be able to identify where a rip current is located. And this is partnership with UC Santa Cruz, and we have a publication that's presently in revision. And this is really important for a number of reasons, but one of which being that right now we're in the process of operationalizing the NOAA rip current forecast model, which incidentally is in itself a machine learning approach to predict rip current occurrence. And it relies on NWPS, the nearshore wave prediction system, which is the underlying forcing numerical model for the rip current predictions. And so we have a way to forecast rip currents. What is the real challenge is saying, you know, detecting them. Is our model correct? You know, we've relied on lifeguards to tell us that, which is, I think, has been, you know, really helpful. But we don't have lifeguards everywhere, and different lifeguards see things differently. So we really need a good way to be able to, you know, in a very quantitative way, identify, are there rip currents present? Should we be forecasting them for this region? And this approach really enables us to do this. On top of that, the reason we even have this imagery is for something called WebCOOS. It's a new project of the webcam for coastal observations and operational support. It's a new IUSE OTT funded project that we started with a kind of a pilot study with a number of cameras you can see there on the bottom left with Surfline, who installed the cameras. And we installed these and really worked on creating the fundamental baseline system to be able to store coastal imagery data to then use it for these types of approaches. This is a partnership with Socorra, with USGS, with academia, with Surflines, with private industry, with Axiom Data Science. And so I think it's a great example of the value of partnerships, the value of using innovative data and applying AI to that data. And the last thing I'll say is, in addition to the rip current detection, our group also did some work on detecting beach use, and it was used during the COVID crisis to be able for communities to say how many people are using our beaches. You know, are they potentially, you know, is there potentially too much attendance in particular locations? So already being in use and paying dividends. So I think those are just some examples of where we are even right now with AI at NOAA. I think I could cite over 100 more. We did a survey of all the projects, ongoing projects across NOAA, and I think there was well over 100 AI related projects. So we're already doing great work here. But I think, as Admiral Gallaudet mentioned, we recognize that we need to make sure we have a focused effort to move these things forward and have a good strategic plan for how to continue to advance the use of AI. And so this doesn't just involve AI. There are 6 strategies, the same image roughly that Admiral Gallaudet used. And really the importance of this is that the strategies are all interrelated. You know, you can't have AI without a data and a cloud strategy, and you can't have unmanned systems without AI, right? So all of these things are interrelated, and so we're moving them together kind of at the same time. In terms of the AI strategy in particular, what was the goal of developing this? And it was to dramatically expand the application of artificial intelligence in every NOAA mission area by improving the efficiency, effectiveness, and coordination of AI development and usage across the agency. We released the strategy back in February, and you can look at it now. So if you haven't had a chance to read it, I would really encourage you to give it a look. It's a quick read, but I think it's really informative. I'll give some high-level overview of it today, but definitely encourage you to give it a closer look if you haven't yet. So this was the strategy, and that gave us kind of where we are going, but we need to know how to get there. And that's what this NOAA AI Strategic Implementation Plan does for us. So all those 6 strategies I mentioned earlier are developing implementation plans to give us specific actions and really make our strategies actionable. What are we going to do? Who's going to do it? When are we going to do it? We built this largely from input during an implementation workshop we held back in February, which was incidentally one of the last times I think I did anything face-to-face. So it seems, in some ways, it seems like yesterday. And we've been very careful to really try to identify specific actions, leads, target completion dates to really hold ourselves accountable for making progress. It's synergistic with the other S&T plans, and we should have it published soon. It's in its final phases right now, and I think we'll definitely have it published before the end of the year, maybe sooner. And so I'm not going to, because it's not published yet, I'm not going to go through very specific details of the actions, but I'm going to give you some high-level overview and some examples of what we're doing right now in terms of implementation. So the first goal we had is establish an efficient organizational structure and processes to advance AI across NOAA. And this largely ties into what Admiral Gallaudet already led off with the Center for Artificial Intelligence. I think one of the things we recognized early on was that we have a wide range of subject matter expertise and a wide range of topical areas that we support at NOAA. But when you start talking about how AI is incorporated in those different topical areas, there's a lot of synergy and overlap. So for example, if I'm going to use AI to detect different coral from imagery, or if I'm going to use AI to detect rip currents from imagery, the underlying approach to applying it to imagery is very similar. And so there's no reason we should be developing different approaches to using AI towards imagery in stovepipes across NOAA. We need to make sure we're communicating, we're collaborating, we're working together to be able to share expertise, to share best practices and things like that. So one of the main impetus behind the center is to make sure that collaboration, that understanding across NOAA is occurring. And so the center is a centrally located. It's located in Nesdis, but it's a distributed center. So in other words, every LO, every line office will have members tied to that center to make sure that there's the coordination, the collaboration, communication from this kind of centralized approach to the more distributed groups across NOAA doing AI research and work. In addition to I think Admiral Gallaudet really hit on the points of what the center is going to be focused on. And actually, the next 4 goals I'm going to talk about are really all things that the AI Center is going to be helping with. But in addition to the center, we also have the NOAA AI Executive Committee, which I am chairing right now. And that committee has members from every LO. And it's really designed to provide the strategic oversight over the center to make sure, hey, we're meeting the needs across NOAA. And to help make sure we, in terms of strategic planning, we know where we're going, we're hitting our goals. The executive committee is the group that put together the implementation plan that will soon be available. In addition to just kind of the general organizational structure, we're also really making sure that we are synergistic with the other strategies. And in particular for AI, I think it's important to mention cloud and data, as both are essential to do AI work. So the cloud, thinking about data being in the cloud, co-ops, for instance, just put our data and our processing up into the cloud recently in AWS. And so we're on the forefront of that. And when your data is there, it's best to have your processing there. So, one of the things we're working on too is doing a lot of our AI development in the cloud in AWS, and it really makes that a lot easier. And so partnering with the cloud strategy, I think is going to be essential on a lot of fronts. And then with data, I think just thinking about, AI for data and data for AI. So in other words, you're going to apply AI to big data sets like the large scale ocean data set that I mentioned that OAR is looking at for ocean dynamics and things like that. You're going to apply AI to those large data sets to learn from them, to process them, to utilize them. You're also going to need to make sure your data is ready for AI. I can attest to the fact that messing with your data and just prepping your data for AI work is the vast majority of your time. And I'm sure Gray, talking next, would agree with me there. It's just, getting your data ready is a challenge. And so the more we can do on the front end to prep our data for AI, the better off and the more quickly we can make advancements. And so I think that tie-in with the data strategy there is going to be really important. So our second goal advance AI research and innovation in support of NOAA's mission. So this is really the research-focused goal, which of course you're going to think about OAR, but every NOAA line office has some component of research occurring in their office. And so this is about incorporating AI explicitly in our research. And in the short term, this means things like just existing RFPs, existing programs. Let's make sure we call out AI explicitly. So we're already working on that. If you think about our cooperative institutes, NOAA has 20 cooperative institutes across the US, has 5 cooperative science centers. So in terms of partnering with academia and getting research, working towards research with academic partners, we want to make sure AI is incorporated in those proposals, in cooperative institute agreements, in RFPs related to cooperative institutes. So really making sure AI is explicitly a focus. So that's something we can do right now without any new money, right? And in addition to that, looking forward into the future, think about things like new RFPs related to AI. We have topics like that in our implementation plan. Looking at an AI prize. So I have the example here of the Blue Economy Ocean Observing Prize. That's an ongoing effort between IUCE and NOS and Department of Energy. And DOE's done a bunch of these types of prize systems, and they've worked really well in terms of spurring innovation and getting people who might not normally be applying for government grants to participate in the process. And so we want to do something similar with AI. So that's on our list to do for our implementation plan. In addition to that, existing structures like NOAA Testbeds and Proving Grounds. So I think about the COMT, right, which I'm sure you all are intimately familiar with. That's a place where we can right now start making sure AI is incorporated in things we consider at our test beds and proving grounds. And so, that can be a focus area in the short term. And then maybe in the long term, we look at having AI specific test beds. But in the short term, we can use what we have in place right now around research and start incorporating AI right now. And so goal 3, thinking about research, the next step is accelerating the transition of that research to operational capabilities. So R2X, right? R2O, R2A, how do we get from, how do we get across that valley of death? How do we get something from RL1 and 2 to RL9 quickly? And I know, I'm sure many people here know that can be a struggle. That's something that NOAA has really focused on in general across all of our research. But we want to make sure to explicitly call that out with our AI, because I think we see the value of getting some of this work into operation sooner rather than later, because you can start gaining that dramatic efficiency from AI. And so one of the things we're doing here in the short term is, again, looking at ways to prioritize transitioning AI research. If you're going to save a bunch of man hours by getting that AI implemented, you want to do that soon, because then you can use those work hours for other things, right? And so that's a priority. If you think about best practices, right? AI in particular is a challenge because it's a black box to a lot of people. And so one of the things we want to work on is developing best practices that if you are going to transition AI research to operations, here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to demonstrate in terms of skill and performance, reliability, trustworthiness. How is your AI, can you demonstrate that your AI is going to function properly and improve upon existing practices? In terms of funding transitions, I think we want to look towards specific RFPs related to transitioning AI research, but there are already opportunities to incorporate AI language in existing RFPs. So for example, the IUCE OTT transmission RFP I mentioned before had language in it already focusing on AI. So again, existing opportunities, but incorporating AI where we can. And then lastly, how do we know we're doing a good job? How do we know we are transitioning AI projects successfully? This is where something like the NOAA Research and Development Database comes into play. As I mentioned before, we wanted to know, hey, what are all the AI projects ongoing at NOAA? When we have something like the NRDD, we can quickly check and see, hey, what's all the AI work? Where do they stand? How many things have we transitioned? And what we're going to work towards as a group in terms of the executive committee is make sure that we're tracking those success stories, tracking when things are transitioning, demonstrating progress that we are in fact transitioning AI to operations. Goal 4, maybe one of the most important goals in my opinion, and probably relevant to a lot of you, is strengthening and expanding AI partnerships. And so, On the short term, what does that mean? It means things like looking at existing partnership opportunities and explicitly incorporating AI. So things like NOAA, the National Oceanographic Partnership Program, which many of you are probably aware of, we can get AI-specific language incorporated in those RFPs that come from NOAA to make sure we're advancing AI through that program without any new program established. Similarly, with SBIR, the NOAA Small Business Innovation Research Program, that is an existing program where it really fits in well with AI, and we can get those AI requirements in the RFP. We're working with SBIR right now for the next call to make sure there's an AI component in there. So those are things we can do, again, right now to make sure we're focusing on AI. I think about cooperative institutes again, because a big portion of partnership obviously is with our academic partners. Working with those cooperative institutes to make sure that we're focusing, at least explicitly on AI, potentially developing an AI cooperative institute in the future, but we have 20 of them. AI fits in a lot of them. We can make sure we're incorporating that right now. Another academic partnership is something like what Admiral Gallaudet mentioned, the NSF OU AI Institute. So NSF started these 5 AI institutes. OU is one of them. It's the AI Institute for Trustworthy Weather, Climate, and Coastal Oceanography. And we partner closely with Amy McGovern, who's the lead there, as well as some of the partner institutions, Philippe Tussaud, for instance, over at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. And so NOAA has already been really involved with that group even previous to this proposal being funded. But we see, certainly have a working relationship there. It's a great opportunity to be able to incorporate, people in the AI community into helping NOAA advance our research objectives, because all the research isn't obviously going to come internally. And then lastly, thinking about industry relationships as well, right? Those partnerships with industry, in particular, an example from Google. We've already done work with Google Fisheries and NESDIS, worked with Google on this AI for Social Good program, where we had, I think, 15 years of underwater acoustic data. And Google worked with us to take that and detect humpback whale signals out in the Pacific Islands to be able to say, hey, where are humpback whales? Where are they going? How are they moving? And it's really a really innovative proposal and project. And so we're already doing this stuff, but we're going to have more. So we just signed an OTA, an other transactional authority with Google. This is going to be there's going to be a press release on this pretty soon, I think. And so this basically was led by NESDIS and gives the opportunity for NOAA and Google to work closely together, different AI projects, and specifically focusing on looking at satellite observations, other environmental observations, and how those can be applied to things like weather forecasting and improving efficiency in our existing products. So that's something already on the horizon, and I think there's going to be a whole host of other opportunities with other industry as well in terms of moving AI forward. And so then lastly, but I think this one is my #1 goal, and so definitely not least, is promoting AI proficiency in the workforce, right? So I think everyone would acknowledge that because it's going to be in everything we do. And so it's really going to be essential to have this broad base of AI proficiency. So how do we do that? Well, one thing is using the AI Center is developing a centralized learning center for AI, both for in-person training, whenever we actually get to that again, but then also having an online presence where you can pull in the existing AI training at things like, that already exists. I'm sure if you've seen Kaggle and Google, there's already a lot of AI training out there, but it's just so much that if you're trying to get into it, you might not know where to start and what's relevant to you. So what we can do with the center is making sure we're pulling in those external resources and making them appropriately available to our workforce, in addition to developing specific trainings that might be focused on activities that different parts of NOAA is going to be pursuing in AI. In addition to the center, we can again use our existing processes like NRAP, the rotational assignment program, to have specific calls for AI projects in that program. And actually, we've already done that. My office put forth an AI proposal in the last NRAP cycle, and we just had someone finish up. Eric DiFiore from Coast Survey worked with me for 6 months, advancing some of our work around using AI for water level quality control and using AI for detecting flood and coastal imagery. And so we're already doing that. And so we're going to really call out to all the line offices here coming up with the next NRAP cycle to really get in those AI specific programs to be able to start having some cross-pollination of AI expertise across NOAA. In addition to that, I think you have to think about, sometimes there's something beyond just a one-off course or a short focused training that people might need. And so thinking about advanced education, right? And so maybe we need to send some of our people back to school to get degrees related to AI, or at least take coursework related to AI. And so how do we do that? Let's use things like Coursera and online opportunities to pursue coursework in AI, but also potentially in-person opportunities. So really focusing on existing advanced education programs at NOAA, where people can go back and go back to school, and making sure we're finding those opportunities specifically for AI. And then lastly, it's not just our existing workforce, but what about the workforce of the future, right? So again, thinking back to our cooperative institutes and our cooperative science centers, making sure that graduate programs, undergraduate programs are already focusing on AI, and that there's opportunities there for them to engage with NOAA scientists on AI-related work. So you think about our Hollings Scholar Program, our Educational Partnership Program, which has master's students as well. Those are opportunities to make sure, again, we include AI right now in our calls and those scholarship and internship opportunities, and start building up that expertise of the future workforce, not just for NOAA, but for our academic partners, for our industry partners, because it's going to be essential to really continue moving things forward. And so I'll finish with a plug. Right now, we have our ongoing second annual NOAA Workshop, Leveraging AI in Environmental Sciences. It's a workshop in slow motion because of the pandemic. It was delayed, and now we're doing it over a longer period of time. It's going until February. If you haven't signed up, if you haven't seen it yet, I would encourage you to do so. There's been a lot of great presentations, and I think there will be some more in the future. And I'll just say, again, this is an example of something we're doing right now. We identified this in the strategy and the implementation plan, and we're already doing it. And then the center, AI Center, is going to be pushing this forward beyond this year. So again, highly encourage you to check that out. And if I have time, I'll take any questions. Thanks.